The Deadly Secret of Fort Detrick, America's Forgotten Bioweapons Lab. Imagine a small town in Maryland, peaceful, quiet, just another dot on the map. But beneath its surface lies one of the darkest chapters in American history. Fort Detrick, once home to the U.S. Army's most secretive bioweapons research division. For decades, this facility operated under the radar, engineering viruses, bacteria, and deadly toxins that could be used not just on enemies, but possibly on citizens themselves. In the early 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, the U.S. government feared the Soviets were building biological weapons that could wipe out cities without a single shot fired. So in response, the U.S. built its own program hidden deep within Fort Detrick. Officially, it was about defense, but unofficially, scientists were developing anthrax bombs, plague aerosols, and weaponized viruses never meant to see the light of day. One of those scientists was Frank Olson, a biological warfare expert who worked behind locked doors with access to some of the most disturbing experiments ever conducted. But in 1953, Olson began to unravel. He told his colleagues he couldn't sleep. He started questioning the morality of their work. And then, just days after attending a CIA retreat, he fell, or was pushed, from a 13th floor hotel window in New York. The official story? Suicide. But later evidence suggested something darker. Olson had been secretly dosed with LSD as part of MK Ultra. He became unstable, a risk, and some believe he was silenced, murdered by the very agency he served. But Fort Detrick's secrets don't end with Olson. In 1969, President Nixon publicly ended the U.S. biological weapons program. The labs were shut down, or so the public was told. But over the years, strange things kept happening. Classified documents leaked. Former employees spoke out. Some reported animal testing gone wrong. Others claimed containment failures were quietly covered up. And in 2019, the CDC abruptly shut down parts of Fort Detrick's labs, citing safety violations, but gave no details. Locals whispered of strange illnesses. Workers died mysteriously. FOIA requests were denied. And through it all, the U.S. government maintained that everything was under control. But if Fort Detrick's history teaches us anything, it's that secrets this dangerous never stay buried. Because maybe the biggest threat wasn't the enemies overseas. Maybe the real danger was growing in America's own backyard. After Frank Olson's mysterious death in 1953, Fort Detrick should have become a symbol of caution. Instead, it dug deeper into the shadows. The U.S. biological weapons program didn't slow down. It accelerated, hidden beneath layers of redacted memos, front organizations, and national security buzzwords. Inside those gates, they weren't just creating weapons. They were exploring how diseases could be weaponized to control populations, disrupt economies, and win wars without ever firing a bullet. One of the most chilling rumors to emerge was that Fort Detrick had experimented with aerosolized Ebola, a virus so deadly that a single droplet can liquefy organs. Scientists knew it wasn't a practical battlefield weapon, but they wondered, could it be used in assassinations? Could it be released in a closed environment to eliminate a target without leaving a trace? We don't have the documents to prove it, but the patterns are there. The secrecy, the denials, the deaths. In the 1970s and 80s, journalists began asking questions. Why were so many documents missing? Why were former lab technicians dying young, often of rare diseases? Why did local hospitals around Frederick, Maryland begin reporting clusters of unexplained illnesses? Strange rashes, lung problems, sudden neurological breakdowns? No one had answers, or rather the government wasn't giving any. Then came 1989. A bizarre and terrifying incident took place just miles from Fort Detrick in a facility run by a private contractor. Dozens of monkeys imported from the Philippines began dying suddenly. Autopsies revealed something horrifying, a filovirus closely related to Ebola. And worse, this strain appeared to be airborne. Scientists from Fort Detrick were called in. They decontaminated the building, destroyed the animals, and quietly renamed the virus Reston. Officially, it wasn't dangerous to humans, but the operation felt less like containment and more like cover-up. The public never learned the full details. To this day, many believe that the Reston incident was just the tip of a much larger iceberg, an accident that revealed how unstable and unpredictable bioengineering had become. Then came 2001, the anthrax attacks. Just days after September 11th, letters containing anthrax spores were sent to news outlets and politicians, killing 5 people and infecting 17 others. The powder was highly refined, weaponized. It wasn't something that could be made in a garage. Investigators eventually traced the source back to a scientist who worked at Fort Detrick. The FBI named Dr. Bruce Ivins, a vaccine researcher at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRID, based at Fort Detrick. He denied it, and before he could stand trial, he died by suicide. Officially, the case was closed, but many scientists criticized the FBI's conclusions, saying the evidence was weak, circumstantial. Some even suggested Ivins had been set up, scapegoated to protect larger operations still active within the lab's walls. That same year, Fort Detrick expanded. Millions of dollars were pumped into new facilities, more secure labs, deeper research. While the public feared foreign terrorists, America quietly reinforced its own capacity for biowarfare. Only now they called it biodefense. But what's the difference? Is it still defense when it's developed in total secrecy, tested without consent, and protected from scrutiny? Is it still defense when civilians get sick, when whistleblowers die mysteriously, when even Congress can't get straight answers? Some say Fort Detrick has moved on. It's now focused solely on vaccines and protection. But history teaches us that the lines between cure and weapon are thin. And when governments are allowed to operate without oversight, the worst-case scenario becomes not just possible, but likely. The real question isn't whether Fort Detrick has secrets, it's how many, and whether some of those secrets are still spreading, unseen, undetected, unstoppable. In August 2019, something strange happened. Without warning, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, issued an immediate shutdown order to sections of Fort Detrick's laboratories. Officially, they cited biosafety protocol violations. But beyond that, nothing. No details, no specifics. Just silence. The public was left with questions. What kind of violations? Was there a leak? Were pathogens released? The Army refused to elaborate, stating only that ongoing issues were being resolved. Meanwhile, rumors swirled. In Frederick County, locals reported increased ambulance traffic. Some hospital workers whispered of respiratory illnesses with no clear diagnosis. The media barely touched the story. The government moved on. But those watching closely saw the pattern. A major bioresearch lab quietly shut down by the CDC, just months before a mysterious respiratory virus would emerge halfway across the world. When COVID-19 began spreading in late 2019, most eyes turned to Wuhan, China. But behind closed doors, some began asking a dangerous question. What if the origins weren't so far away? What if a failure at Fort Detrick played a role in what followed? The government dismissed these claims as conspiracy theory. They pointed to global spread, international travel, wet markets. But those who studied Fort Detrick's history saw something familiar: secrecy, denial, and carefully chosen language designed to close the door before anyone could peek inside. Independent researchers filed FOIA requests to uncover what happened in August 2019. Most were rejected. Others returned blacked-out documents. A few key facts slipped through. The lab had failed a sterilization test. Its wastewater decontamination system had malfunctioned. And, most chilling of all, biological containment was breached. What exactly leaked? That remains unknown. Whistleblowers began to speak, quietly, anonymously. One claimed animal testing had resumed in violation of oversight guidelines. Another suggested that samples of coronaviruses had been part of research under a classified DARPA contract. The Pentagon denied involvement. But then, in 2021, it was revealed that EcoHealth Alliance, a U.S. nonprofit tied to controversial research in Wuhan, had also collaborated with Fort Detrick in years prior. Suddenly, the lines between theory and possibility blurred. But Fort Detrick wasn't just a lab. It was a symbol, a place where invisible threats were created, studied, and sometimes lost. Over decades, the facility had produced anthrax, tularemia, brucellosis, botulinum toxin, organisms capable of devastating populations. Officials always insisted this research was defensive. But how many of those agents made it into real-world tests? In 1955, Army planes sprayed zinc-cadmium sulfide over American cities, St. Louis, Minneapolis, and others. Without informing the public, they claimed it was harmless. But later studies linked the compound to cancer. In 1966, a simulated biological attack was carried out in New York's subway system using a bacterium called Bacillus globigii. Commuters were exposed without warning. Again, no consent. Just cold experimentation. What else might have been tested? Who else might have been exposed? In recent years, residents near Fort Detrick have filed lawsuits, claiming elevated cancer rates, unexplained illnesses, contaminated groundwater. Some of these cases were dismissed. Others remain open. But the Department of Defense has never accepted full responsibility. The deeper you dig, the more the walls close in. Journalists have reported being followed. FOIA requests mysteriously delayed. Former employees warned not to speak. It's not just science, it's national security. And in that space, truth becomes malleable, rewritten to fit the narrative, reshaped to protect power. So what do we really know about Fort Detrick? That it created weapons, that it kept secrets, that it has a history of silence and a legacy of fear, and perhaps that it still holds answers to questions we've only just begun to ask. History has taught us something uncomfortable. The most dangerous secrets are the ones hiding in plain sight. Fort Detrick, once dismissed as just another military base, has slowly revealed itself to be something else entirely. A quiet engine of biological power, an invisible hand in America's darkest experiments. From the early days of anthrax bombs and LSD trials to unexplained shutdowns and whispers of modern-day leaks, it has operated behind a wall of patriotism, bureaucracy, and silence. But walls crack. When you trace the timeline, from Frank Olson's mysterious fall to the weaponized letters of 2001 to the unexplained CDC shutdown in 2019, a pattern emerges, a cycle of denial, disaster, and damage control. And always the story ends the same way, with no real accountability, no justice, just a classified document, a closed case, a forgotten name. Ask yourself this: how many times can a facility be at the center of biological disasters and still be called secure? How many times can the public be kept in the dark before it stops being ignorance and starts being complicity? There are those who still defend Fort Detrick. They say it's essential, that it's where we develop vaccines, where we prepare for the next pandemic, where we protect the nation. And maybe some of that is true. But what's also true is that the line between protection and power is dangerously thin. And once crossed, it doesn't take much to justify any act in the name of security. The real horror of Fort Detrick isn't just what happened in the past, it's what might be happening now, without our knowledge, without our consent. We live in an age where viruses can be engineered, where diseases can be modified at the genetic level, where biolabs are shielded by national flags and classified budgets. And as history has shown, when the government says, "Don't worry, we've got it under control," that's exactly when you should worry most. Because Fort Detrick isn't just a location. It's a symbol of unchecked power, a reminder that science without ethics, secrecy without oversight, and defense without transparency will always, eventually, turn inward. It began with rats in cages, spores in sealed vials, men in lab coats playing God. But the question that remains, the one no one wants to answer, is simple. What's still inside those labs? And what happens when it gets out again?